I think I'd just add too that in terms of pricing, you sort of have to work forward from what the market will bear, as it were, what customer tolerance is, how price sensitive people are in different brackets, different times of day, whether on concession arrangements and so on. So it'll be quite a process, I think, in working out what the optimised level of that is. And it's a question of really trying to use the user pays, if you like, to effectively help pay for the project entirely, if that's possible. If it's not entirely possible, that's why the underwrite is there as a backstop.
Yeah, okay.
So that, but the pricing approach does align, because fundamentally, to maximise the revenues that come out of this, you're looking at promoting volume utilisation, which is the key objective, one of the key objectives we have as council in the transport space, at least.
So the trigger point for the revenue is if it drops below 90%, that means the council's liable to pay the operator the shortfall. Is that correct?
What we need to do is, we had a view when we were in the initial negotiations with this 2 years ago on the sort of CapEx costs, OpEx costs they're considering, based on the best information we had or could estimate about patronage, about where the space was that council would be comfortable. And our initial views were that there was, on those numbers, reasonably good prospect of, in fact, the underwrite not being called on at all. What you have to do, though, is you can't just rely on a set of estimates. You have to stress test that a little bit and look at what a likely worst-case scenario might be, and then what would be the extent of our financial exposure in that sense. How much would we provision for? So that's still the approach we're taking, but in a way that constrains what our space for actually doing a deal once we get down to the base case details. If the CapEx costs have increased before we lock in base case that are such a level that it puts strain on our risk tolerance, then that has to move, or we don't do the deal. So that was your John's comment about back solving it. We had a space where we were reasonably happy with a couple of years ago. The deal parameters need to stay in that space from a practical risk exposure to council.
So was that 75% threshold previously? Trigger point.
Well, there's a few other sort of sliding levers in the thing that go to make up that outcome. So at what level we underwrite and what the CapEx, OpEx, how contingencies are handled, a whole lot of issues, insurance. So until you actually get into locking down the base case, there's various ways that can be made accommodate, but the point is the end game for us is a risk position or practical exposure that's within a certain envelope, and that envelope will be what we put in the annual plan.
So, okay, and will that annual plan material include the actual capital cost of building Sky Park?
No, because it won't be known then.
No, it won't be.
Won't be known, okay.
No, it'll still be, there's quite a detailed design process to go through.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. We have 3 other speakers wanting to ask questions and 2 who want to speak to the debate. So we have Councillor Brewer and Walker and Watson.
I just, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is around our liability around CapEx, and I hear what Councillor Darby deducted is that there's no direct liability if there's a CapEx blowout, for want of a better term, by the operator. But I want to test the idea of an indirect liability, and the first question I suppose in that is there going to be, or will there be negotiated a ceiling on the fee or tariff or cost to cross for the operator cannot go above?
Well, that's really a question of if we want to constrain the operator's ability to earn out the investment they've just made, we can do so, but we pay for that. Well, so do we want to fund that constraint, or do we want to leave them with pricing discretion? But there is an overlay where we will have input into those pricing decisions. We believe that the pricing decisions, if you price too high, you reduce demand effectively. So where all your costs are fixed or largely non-variable, that's not usually a good business practice. You're going to end up making less money by pricing too high. So it's one of the factors. In working through the base case, yes, I think it's fair to say the proposed initial pricing will be a good reference point, so we'll have much better visibility of that once we start to work through the detailed numbers.
Well, okay, well, I'll put this scenario to you then. If the CapEx was to blow out, and I actually think this is a bigger risk than woeful patronage numbers, than advertising not meeting its targets, sponsorship or OPEX escalations. I actually think it's around the capital escalations. And I put it to you, if the operator finds that all of a sudden this is going to cost them 75 million, they're not going to come back, because it's not within our agreement to come back cap in hand and ask for another 30 or 40 or million shorthand. That's not the issue here. But I want to know whether they can recover in part or whole that shortfall through their charging. And so all of a sudden they're up for twice the cost, say. They double the cost of what we were thinking for the cost to cross for Aucklanders. That triggers our extreme price sensitivity of users clause, which makes us liable for an underwrite. So it's not just an underwrite, I put it to you, on the operational costs, on revenue falling down, on patronage not meeting its target, on that. It's also, I put it to you, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that if the capital cost blows out, and I don't know if we've seen capital construction costs blow out in Auckland before, Councillor Quacks, but if they were to blow out, would that enable the operator to rack up their tariffs? And you're saying there's no ceiling there, because that would be bad business. And then, hence, that would trigger an extreme, quote, extreme price sensitivity of users, which would mean that these risks would not be, which means that the council would be liable to make up the shortfall and to effectively underwrite it at a capital level.
Yes, no, I don't agree that that will increase council's risk. The CapEx blowout is, if that were to occur, is their responsibility. In terms of pricing, though, if a business is losing money, you don't usually stop losing money by increasing the prices where you've got clients who are sensitive to the price. It's usually counterproductive. So we've done initial analysis on that around the pricing concerns and what a rational business operator would do in terms of pricing. So that's one aspect, and we'll obviously drill down further into that as part of the detailed base case analysis. The other component is the overall service levels and KPIs regime that we have. So there's commercial alignment and incentives to ensure good behaviour, which puts them in a sort of box, and there's also contractual levers. So those sorts of issues then get dealt with in terms of, well, if you have an operator that's deliberately not running the business well or doing other things, then there are contractual consequences leading to ability to terminate and so on. So there's a range of ways in which that risk is controlled. It's certainly, I think, well, I think we all agree actually that the cost of a CapEx overrun on this is the single biggest risk. And bear in mind, once a private provider signs up to a deal like this, well, that's implicit in the point you've just raised, they're on contract to deliver for that value, and the cost of an overrun is to their account. So that is it is a significant issue in the transaction.
Through the chair, might I just add, I mean, you've highlighted exactly the issue around this, which is that procurement of the capital cost and the huge risk, and we all know what tends to happen typically when public sector participate in that. The bit I don't think you quite joined the dots on, Councillor, is that we're underwriting only the revenue. So I can see what you're thinking, which is saying you clearly try and raise the fees, the charges so high to get your revenue back to meet your additional capital cost, thereby dropping down the patronage numbers, which sort of self-defeats it. Remember, we're only underwriting back to a number again, a revenue number again. So we haven't actually enabled them to generate a higher level. If they're coming up short, we're not allowing them to generate a higher level of revenue to meet a higher capital cost. Does that make sense? In other words, yeah, so it actually doesn't that mechanism doesn't deliver them the outcome they're looking for, if that's the argument, which is improving their return on their higher capital cost, if you like. It doesn't deliver, and that's the whole beauty of it. It actually separates that out. And to Bram's point as well, I mean, it is called a PPP. There's the word partnership in here, which actually, signifies the two parties are to some degree aligned around this. And so both parties are aligned to success if we're thinking about costs of patronage, the costs and the relationship between that and patronage and so forth.
Just finally...
That mechanism that you're suggesting will not actually solve their problem.
No, but the subsidy that council has kicked into would solve their problem, wouldn't it?
No, it won't, because we'll only be bringing them back to a number.
Yeah.
It won't solve their problem at all. It'll just keep to that number. That's what we're bringing them back to. We're not bringing them back to a higher number. It'll simply be the number we've agreed, irrespective of what that final capital cost was.
But our agreement, if there is extreme price sensitivity, is it not the fact that we would fund the shortfall? I.e., even if they pitched it up a little bit higher and the numbers went down?
We would pick up the underwrite. That's right. We would pick up more of an underwrite in that theory, but it won't make them any better off.
No.
They're agnostic as to whether they got the underwrite.
I'm not worried about them making a profit. I'm worried about the extra cost on the ratepayer potentially.
Yep. So what would be their logic to doing it that way rather than taking the revenue, keeping the revenue slightly lower to get to their number and actually having the patronage higher, which would probably actually generate more revenue for them in other ways. My point being that if they raise the revenue, the cost patronage drops, we make up that difference. They might as well stay exactly where they were with the patronage number. It's the same dollar revenue. It still doesn't address there's no mechanism there for them to then get a higher overall number in terms of income to make a return on the higher capital cost. It's $1 for another dollar. Now, to your point, they could gain, you're suggesting they're gaming you. It doesn't actually take them any further ahead.
Does it cost the ratepayer anymore?
Okay.
If they chose to game you, it would, yes.
But
we have other provisions.
But
we have other
not worrying about
provisions.
their profit line.
I think through the chair, I guess the key is, the consequential impact of that CapEx, if it was a CapEx blowout, the consequential increase in the cost is borne by the operator, not by council. So we've got to separate almost the revenue from the ongoing cost. If the costs go up, that is eating into their profits, not our underwrite. The underwrite is very separate because it's based off the revenue. So that's where our risk is sitting on the revenue side, not on the ongoing cost side.
Councillor Walker.
Sure, my question follows on from Councillor Casey's and Councillor Lee's, and it's about anticipating the future. My personal belief is that this will be a stunning success and that revenue will exceed projections. The public will be using this a great deal and there will be a huge demand for it to be free. Given that it's basically bolted onto a bridge that's owned by NZTA, I would suggest that the ultimate owners of this project should be
Searching for a question.
NZTA. I'm just coming to that, and I said my question went further to that of Councillor Casey and Councillor Lee. So what I'm anticipating is the prospect of having, obviously, the council buying it out, but ultimately ownership resting in NZTA and having as seamless a transition to that as possible. Now, can we contemplate that in what we're putting together or anticipate that?
Well, yes, we can contemplate it, and yes, it's doable. That would depend on NZTA's view, obviously, if it ever wanted to put itself in that position. But yeah, I mean, those things are doable, but...
Is there anything that we need to do in terms of how we structure the arrangements and contracts to facilitate that?
So repeat.
There's a heck of a lot of detail and contingencies. I mean, in the contracts, we've worked through all these issues and many more.
Okay, so that's one question.
Yep.
The other question's a pretty simple one. This is a very innovative project in terms of intellectual property. Where does the ownership of the intellectual property lie?
Well, presently it actually sits with the Trust and Morrison and Co, who've worked up all of the industrial designs, if I can put it that way.
And the Trust includes who?
It's the charitable trust.
Okay.
Gibbons, yeah, so in that sense, it's something of a unique proposal, and that's what they've come to us with. If I'm not sure if you're hinting at the point that if we wanted to do another option or a do-it-yourself option around this, yes, we don't own the IP. We would have to acquire it.
Sure, I'm just putting forward the view that I think that there's a substantial value in the intellectual property, and I'm just putting the question as to whether any options around the ownership of that property have been considered.
Really good question.